Check one, check two. Hello, check one, check two. Positive.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to begin our program in about 2 minutes, if you wouldn't mind having your seats. Great. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you all for attending in person and online today. Today we are presenting our program, Completing the Mission, Supporting Veterans and Military Families. The sponsor of today's event is the Veterans Benefit Guide, and we'd like to thank them for their support. We are here today, just days after Veterans Day, when the country comes together to honor the 18 million veterans living in the United States. Caring for their health and well-being should be a year-round priority. So we are very excited to gather everyone for a wide-ranging discussion on veterans' health, both physical and mental, and how best to serve veterans, their families, after they have served the country. As with all of our Hill events, we have invited a wide spectrum of veteran services organizations and active duty military personnel. Unfortunately, not all were able to join us on stage today. Before we get underway, we have a few housekeeping rules. If you are here in the room, please put your phones on silent for the duration of the program, but you are welcome to join us on social media. And with that, I am delighted to welcome Mike Vaquera, NewsNation's Washington Bureau Chief, to the stage. He will be moderating our first interview with Allison Jaslow, CEO of the Iraq and Afghanistan's Veterans of America. Thank you all for joining us.
So Allison Jaslow is maybe a familiar face to many of us. I know she's a familiar face to me because she's a strong advocate for veterans as the head of the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. We were just talking backstage, and Allison, you were saying this is a unique time to be in your position.
Yeah, I think that one of the most exciting things about stepping into this role, I became CEO in March of this year, is the post 9/11 generation of veterans are really ascendant in America today. I am an Iraq War veteran. The membership that I represent has all served post 9/11, and we are now mid-career. So we're not just popping up on Congress, the Mike Gallaghers of the world and the Pat Ryans of the world who are getting elected to Congress, but also selling off their first startups. And I think at a time where America's really thirsting for real leadership, our generation of veterans are stepping into places where they can really provide that. And so that excites me because I feel like it also gives me optimism for our country and our future right now.
So you're saying the post 9/11 generation is now sort of coming into their own as leaders of society, leaders of politics, leaders of culture,
Yep.
leaders of business.
100%.
Yeah.
Yep.
And what do you do to help them along?
Well, it's funny. Somebody in my position, and especially like our founder, spent a lot of their time illuminating problems or needs of our generation, making sure that the post 9/11 generation got the same GI Bill that the World War II generation of veterans got, or to make sure that we got access to mental health care, to make sure that people knew that there was a veteran suicide crisis, which still exists today. But on the same, at the same time, we also have tried to champion the Vets Rising movement, which is essentially also illuminating not just the problems that our generation faces, but also the opportunity that our generation of veterans brings for America at large. There are people who have stepped up post 9/11 and volunteered. We did not have a drafter in our wars to served multiple times. Many veterans, myself included, deployed not just once, but twice or three times, especially the special operators these days. And I think that they represent the best among us. And so what we try to do is, in addition to highlighting the challenges that face our generation of veterans, is also highlighting the best among us, and also those people who, those Americans among us who are also veterans who can lead us forward at what I would argue is such an important time in our country and the globe.
Give me a specific example, if you could, about how the priorities are different now for this generation than in past generations.
I think multiple deployments have caused unique issues. I'll speak to mental health care. You oftentimes see the veteran suicide crisis through the lens of PTSD or trauma experienced during wartime. But I have battle buddies, and I'm sure plenty of other folks do, who, because of multiple deployments, had a divorce or had a family fall apart because they were over it. They didn't want to have to say goodbye again. And I actually had a battle buddy who deployed for his third time. His wife left him when he was in Afghanistan, and he took his life because, he was already struggling, and that was one thing too much for him. And so I think that there are these unique burdens that folks who have deployed multiple times, because we've decided to go to war with an all-volunteer force, and people have deployed multiple times, where, your chronic pain maybe could have been avoided if you only deployed once, but because you deployed twice is very different. And then we're still learning more about sort of the unique challenges of the way that we're waging wars today. I'd recommend Dave Phillips of the New York Times wrote a really great investigative piece a couple of weeks ago about how soldiers who have been deployed, because if you didn't know, there are still troops in Syria and Iraq, in addition to those who've been pre-positioned around.
We've heard about that recently.
Yes. But to fight terrorism, and ISIS specifically, there have been artillery batteries who were deployed to the region who we decided as a country to fight terrorism by just bombing the crap out of ISIS. And the artillery troops who were doing the bombing, it seems like have dealt with traumatic brain injuries that aren't being properly diagnosed, because usually we figure traumatic brain injuries are a result of an attack from a combatant. But it seems like the artillery in this case, especially because they've had more exposure to the actual firing than they otherwise would in a different combat environment, might have actually caused the traumatic brain injuries. And so there are these, just because of the unique way that we've waged war, whether it was in Iraq and Afghanistan or even in the present day, that the all-volunteer troops who are waging our current wars are just dealing with unique challenges that are very different than, the Vietnam and World War II. And part of that is also just generational,
That's so fascinating. So how does that translate to your priorities your organization's priorities and your priorities as the leader of that organization, both here in Washington and elsewhere?
Well, I think our priorities, more than anything else, are set by our leadership, and it's having a good finger on the pulse of what veterans' needs are and or desires. I mean, our generation has also lived through the opioid crisis, and so more than any of the other generations are we open to alternative therapies, whether that's wanting access to cannabis to help manage your PTSD, or with greater research around psychedelics, with psychedelic-assisted therapy actually helping people heal from their PTSD. There are many veterans of at least the post-9/11 generation who want access, want more options on the table to help treat their wartime wounds. But I feel like our role, especially as an organization that represents the current generation of war veterans, is twofold. Not only just making sure that we keep the finger on the pulse of our generation's needs in real time, but we also are in a unique position to make sure that the voices of those who are still serving aren't overlooked as well. And I feel like the role that we play in that regard is, I have the luxury to take to social media if I want to. You don't really get rewarded if you're in the military by speaking up, especially if you want to stay in for a career, which I thought I wanted to at a certain point. And so making sure that the needs and concerns of those who are still serving are attended to, and that no politician is just speaking for them or no other group, but that actual individuals who have served and know people who are still serving are making sure that those voices are heard is an important priority for us as well.
Okay, your organization is talking about insisting on a positive veteran narrative as one of its goals. What does that mean to you?
Well, I mentioned this earlier. I think as much as we want to address the suicide crisis, we want to talk about the best among us. Right. There are incredible veteran leaders, whether it's folks in Congress like Tammy Duckworth or Mark Kelly or Mike Gallagher or Brian Mast. There are also veterans who are serving on Wall Street and leading banks or senior executives, or starting clean energy companies like John Powers is. He lives in Buffalo, New York, so he's not here in Washington, D.C., but has spent some time in the Pentagon. But I really believe, it's sad for me that You know, there was a Time magazine cover about a decade ago that called us the new greatest generation.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yes, and while flattering, I feel like it's a false comparison because I believe that in World War II, it was actually a generation that stepped up to the
Right.
plate post us getting attacked in Pearl Harbor. Whereas, you know, with our generation, it was a very small, you know, less than 1% of us who actually stepped up to the plate and served. And while I appreciate, you know, characterizing us as the new generation, or the new greatest generation, I actually don't think it was generational, but I also at the same time hope that our generation of veterans can maybe inspire other folks to step up, at least at this point, even if we didn't post 9/11, at a time where I think most people in this audience can agree that like we are really thirsting for leadership. We are thirsting for people who are putting country before themselves, that maybe our generation, or at least the best among us, can inspire other people to do just that.
Okay, so you brought up the 1%, only 1%, fewer than 1% are serving in the military of American citizens. So this has been a big issue, a recurring issue over the course of the last year or so, and that is the recruitment challenges that the military faces.
Yes.
We hear that potential recruits don't meet physical standards or academic standards, or there's a lack of interest, lack of people going and signing up or wanting to sign up. What's the remedy?
I definitely don't have all the answers, Mike.
Okay.
But I will say, first and foremost, I think we need to double down on how we take care of our veterans, because if we want people to step up and volunteer to serve and to take that oath, they need to know that like what they're risking, what they're asking their family to sacrifice for, that despite all of that, despite what happens to them when they might deploy into combat one day, that their nation at least is going to take care of them full stop on the other side of that service, I think is very important. If they don't know that and have that guarantee going in, why would you step up and serve?
Yeah.
But I, you know, more than anything else, and I've actually talked to leaders at the Pentagon about this, like I wish we could make service like hip again, you know?
All
Like
right. When was it hip?
I mean, has anybody in here seen the movie Renaissance Man with Danny DeVito? That was, I loved that movie when I was growing up. And
Right.
when I was growing up, the Army was the dream. I ended up getting out. But I think, I don't feel like it's rocket science. I think that, I think that the cultural zeitgeist in America drives a lot, you know? And if we saw more movies or more people serving and you know, in the context of what you do, Mike, like if we appreciated people's service and shed light on it, you know? Unfortunately, I don't even think that the news is covering those who are serving as much as they should these days. How many people know that 5 special operators died over the weekend?
In this room, probably a lot. Yeah.
Maybe in this room.
Yeah.
But I was talking to somebody earlier today who was like, oh, I missed that. But, you know, I don't always just want to shed light on those who are sacrificing and paying the ultimate sacrifice. But at the same time, no different than my organization is trying to shed light on both the problems but also the successes of our generation.
Sure.
I wish that America and American society was also highlighting the
And that's
successes.
part of the positive veteran narrative, right? That you're talking about.
Yeah,
right?
you can join the military and level up your entire family.
There you go.
You know, you can serve and get the post 9/11 GI Bill is, I mean, if you want to go to Columbia that has a really great veterans program, you not only get tuition to Columbia, but the United States will pay for your housing at a rate that allows you to live in Manhattan
Wow.
without feeling the pressure of living in Manhattan. It is a high, what they call it, basic allowance for housing that you get in Manhattan to go to school at Columbia. And the fact that, you know, you can be rewarded by your country for your service and have come from a rural or inner city community, maybe not having any of your parents who have gone to college, spend a few years in the military, who knows if you deployed or not, but get out and go to Columbia University, no strings attached.
Right.
That's like a rocket ship into, you know, what I hope would still be the American dream that you can achieve in this country today.
I'm hearing you say part of the formula is reverence for service and veterans and reward for service. So it's,
Of course.
yeah. All right. Sounds like a simple formula.
Yeah, I mean, as long as we still continue to fight our wars with an all-volunteer force, I think the benefits of serving outweigh the costs in many ways.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, like there is not risk, or is not without risk. You know, I joined in a peacetime army and had no idea that the World Trade Centers was going to get attacked. I had no idea that we were going to go to war in Afghanistan. Had no idea that we were going to go to war in Iraq. But that said, like, you know, anybody else who was in my same shoes and was able to serve got really rewarded on the other side of that. You know, I went to school on an ROTC scholarship, so I didn't qualify for the post 9/11 GI Bill, but, you know, I think that it still comes, again, as long as we're going to still serve with our all-volunteer force, like the benefits on the other side of your
Sure.
service, if you're willing to step up and do it, in my view, outweigh the costs. And you get the ancillary benefit of wearing the nation's uniform and serving alongside people who are fighting for a common mission. And that is something that I feel like every veteran holds near and dear to their heart. And they're very different on the other side of their service than from, you know, when they
Sure.
stepped up and served, whether
Right.
they actually deployed or not.
At this point, I'm obligated, mostly because it makes me feel good, to point out that my father joined the Marines before the Korean War broke out, re-upped, and then the Korean War broke out, so he ended up sleeping on a snowy ground in Korea for a long time. Which
you talk about generational
Yeah.
divides, I can't even relate to that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was, compared to the World War II in Korea, we were pampered in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Okay.
So,
if you say so.
yes.
Female veterans. What
Yes.
specifically needs to be done for female veterans now that isn't being done?
Well, I think more than anything else, and what's inspired a lot of my advocacy personally is cultural recognition of women veterans. I give a lot of credit to the board of the organization that I run now for elevating a woman veteran to lead Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, because I think to change the way that America sees its veterans, they just need to see me. So, you know, when you close your eyes and you think of a veteran, you can most readily envision me as much as you would, I don't know, a gentleman who's in his 60s and wearing a hat, you know, like the VFW and Legion have. And so, more than anything else, envisioning somebody like me and making sure that there's recognition across the country for women veterans, I think is most important, because I don't want other women veterans to have to do what I've had to do myself, which is prove that I served. You know?
Sure.
Mike, if you told somebody you served, whether you haven't or not, they would believe you.
Yeah.
I'm the kind of person, like, because I'm a woman, I oftentimes have to repeat myself and or show proof that I actually
Is that right?
served.
Really?
Yes.
So there's this sort of built-in
Bias,
bias.
yeah. And so, you know, I think the reason I bring this up is that I feel like everything else comes after that. You know, we can get women everything they need if at a basic level we believe that they're veterans. Because as a nation, we want to give veterans everything to support them on the other side of their service, right? But women veterans wouldn't have challenges getting their basic needs met if, from a basic level, we were believed to be veterans to begin with.
Great. All right, I'm getting the high sign that it's time's
Okay.
up. That 18 minutes just
It went
flew
right
by.
away.
Yeah.
I know.
Well, thanks so
It's
much
like
for
we're
being
having
here.
coffee here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Sorry,
Yeah.
I went off script a little bit. I
It's all
appreciate
good.
it. Yeah.
All right.
Great.
Take care. Thank you.
Okay. Well, that was great. Oh, you're going to do this? Yeah. All right. What do? I sit? I stand?
You have a seat. We're going to swap our program because Congressman Keegan is running a few minutes late. So we are going to bring to the stage Congressman Carrere and Bergman. And so we will switch to that part. Thank you, Mike, for working with us today.
Oh, I gotta get.
We're going to flip through our
Shuffling
papers
my
while we
papers,
get
yes.
to. Thank you both for joining us this morning. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to be rude. Mike Vaquera, pleasure to see you, Congressman.
Vaquera, Lou Correa, good to
Nice.
meet you.
Pleasure, thank you.
I'm Jack.
Hi, Jack.
Nice to meet you.
Former Marine Lieutenant
Yeah,
General.
I was a commercial pilot too. Never say hi, Jack, in an airport to a pilot. Okay?
Something tells me that's not the first time you've told that joke.
You might get that right.
Thank you. Please have a
That's a
seat.
good
I
one.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
All right. Well, I know that both of you are very involved in veterans issues. Congressman, because you've served, and Congressman, because I know you've had a lifelong interest in this
Correct.
issue. You represent Orange County and Anaheim, California, is that correct?
Central Orange County,
Yeah.
California, home to the largest number of veterans in the United States, and proud of it.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it. Congressman, your district?
I have half the state of Michigan, all of the Upper Peninsula, and the upper third of Lower Michigan. So about, to be exact, 48.1% of the landmass, and we have more trees than anything.
Well, and all the trees are the right height, I hear, in Michigan, is
They are perfect.
what a presidential candidate once said.
They are perfect.
Well, that's great. The UP in that area of Michigan, I know, is a really hot destination for tourists right now. I understand it's very beautiful.
Actually, it's beautiful 9 months of the year. And spring is not a fun time because the snow is gone, it's slushy, and the trees haven't come back to life yet, but it is a winter, summer, and especially fall wonderland.
Thank you.
I represent Disneyland, Anaheim. 12 months out of the year, perfect weather. Tourism, come by and enjoy.
Yeah, we'll send all the people from the UP there, and be somewhere between beginning of March and the end of May. How's that?
All right. Well, that's great. All right. We've got geographic opposites here. That's fine. Congressman, let's start with the issue of mental health, and it is a serious issue. And tell me, what resources must be accessible to veterans and their families to address the psychological impacts of military service? Congressman Correa.
Whatever they need. You think about our veterans. We ask them to go off to far away places to fight for freedom. Our veterans don't ask, they just follow orders. We train them to be the best in the world, but they see things that no human being should see. They lose friends like nobody should lose. And then we ask them to come back to the United States and essentially turn it all off like nothing happened. In my opinion, whatever our veterans need when it comes to medical or mental health, we need to give it to them. And the days of thinking about these invisible wounds as something that maybe don't exist or that are made up are gone. We've got to make sure we take care of our veterans. The suicide rate, the challenges they have in terms of coming back and dealing with their families are well documented and well known. So whatever the veterans need, but most importantly, what we have to do is listen. When I was in California, I chaired the Veterans Affairs Committee in the state legislature for about a decade. And the most important thing I did was to listen. Go to town halls, meet with veterans, and listen. Don't talk so much, just listen to them.
Congressman Bergman?
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, Lou stated it exactly. And then let's talk about the delivery of the health care, whether it be in an urban, suburban, rural, or remote environment that you have. It's one thing to have care, it's another thing to have access to the care. And that's where the challenge is, and that's why Congressman Correa and I think we work very well together because we cover all of that, urban, suburban, rural, remote. But to use technology today, if there was one good thing that came out of COVID, it was the advancement of telehealth in the delivery of care, especially to veterans, when it came to advancing from care in the community to getting right, face-to-face with that veteran, even though it was now via some kind of Zoom or whatever it happens to be. So the veterans were the last adopters because they wanted to see their physician or provider face-to-face, but when that couldn't happen because of the limitations of travel, they were the first adopters of telehealth, and now they're touting it. They can sit at home with a cup of coffee, although some of them, quite honestly, said, I'd like to get out of the house for a day. Whatever, that you could read into that however you would like, but the idea is deliver the care, and most importantly, when our role in Congress here is provide the environment where the VA, in this case, or it could be Department of Defense, have the therapists trained with the right techniques to help the veterans here in the 21st century.
The Veterans Benefit Administration paid out $150 billion in compensation and benefits to 1.5 million veterans and survivors. That's a 39% increase from the previous year. Is the current system working? It would appear, judging from that statistic, that it is.
Short answer, yes. And let's give a shout out where it's deserved. Secretary McDonough, who's the Veterans Administration Secretary, has really made a commitment to putting the money in the right place so it gets the results. Where the process is still a little bit backlogged or log jammed. By the way, you know what log jam stands for? You can visualize what a log jam is. Well, in this case, it's levels of government creating the log. So as we pull some of those unnecessary logs out to get the veterans' appeals and the veterans' claim process moving forward, that's all in the right direction. We want to get it right, and we want to do it as quickly as possible.
Okay.
And federal government as well as other levels of government are notorious for stalling on delivering those benefits that you should earn or have earned and are entitled to. I'll give you an example. Social Security disability benefits, it takes you forever to get those benefits. You essentially have to hire a lawyer to represent you, and that stalls the system for 2 or 3 years. There's no need for that. And I think the veterans are in the same situation, which is you make it really difficult. The system makes it difficult for them to get their benefits. And that's got to change. And I think over the last decade, you've seen that change. And as the general has said, the system is working, but it's got to get better. There's no reason for veterans to call my office and say, can you reschedule that appointment that I just got canceled, and the new appointment date is 3 months out. I can't wait 3 months. That shouldn't happen, and they shouldn't have to go through their Congress member to get it done.
If I could add just one thing before we move
Please.
off that. Give the veterans the choice as to where they go for their appeals claims. If they want to go through a VSO, great. If they want to go through a company that provides that. But it's incumbent upon the Veterans Administration to hold all people who do veterans claims accountable for, especially shout out the good results and also take care of the bad actors in the marketplace.
Well, I've learned over the last few days as I've prepared to moderate this conference that that's something of a controversial issue among veterans group. You, too, have sponsored the PLUS Act. Why is it needed?
Free market. If you're a veteran and you're not happy with your claims process, with your appeal process, that you're not getting the results as Congressman Correa just said, you shouldn't have to be calling your representative's office to get that. You should have the choice to go where you want. And if you want to pay a little bit of money, that's your choice. But it's on the Veterans Administration to accredit and to hold accountable anybody who is in that marketplace.
Listen to what Jack just said. Free market, I would use the words individual choice. Give the veterans the opportunity to make their own decisions, where they want to go and how they want to deal with their affairs. What are, of course, is this legislation, but also think about it in other ways, which is the one I worked on in California forever was cannabis, okay? Now we're looking at mushrooms for treatment of veterans' ailments. I didn't wake up one day and say, hey, I want to do this for the veterans. The veterans are coming to us and saying, these are the things we want done for our health. So it's up to us as members of Congress to respond to what they want and make sure these services are delivered in a safe, secure manner with guardrails to make sure they're protected. But give them the choice to essentially look for their services, their medications, the treatments that they're interested in having.
Okay, I just want to follow up very quickly because, after all, I am a journalist. The knock from some of the veteran service organizations is that the groups that do aid for a fee, the veterans in getting benefits, they call them claim sharks. The inference is they're predatory. They're taking advantage of veterans who are in need. What's your response to that?
They really need to actually take a look at the services that the companies provide and not paint everyone with the same brush. That's going back to my comment about the Veterans Administration's responsibility to accredit and hold accountable bad actors. I mean, any marketplace does that. I mean, if you are trying to deliver a product and deceive a customer, there has to be some agency that has oversight. In this case, it's the Veterans Administration in the accreditation process.
And I'm glad to hear there's people questioning the process, kicking the tires, so to speak, because what we're doing is essentially putting guardrails on the system to make sure that those abuses are minimized or don't take place. So we're going from this, today's situation to a place where we actually put safety systems there to make sure that those abuses are minimized,
Okay.
not eliminated.
The issue of psychedelics, Congressman Correa, you brought it up a moment ago. I'm old enough to remember when it was absolutely taboo to talk about even taking mushrooms recreationally. Obviously, we're not talking about recreational use, or
Correct.
what we used to call ecstasy, which I guess is the fundamental ingredient or the street name for some other therapies that are being promoted right now. Why is it important, and what is the evidence, as you understand it, to point to the fact that these can be helpful to veterans who are suffering from mental illness?
I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, but again, I listen. And when you hear Navy SEALs, Marines coming to you and saying, if it wasn't for this treatment, I wouldn't be alive. The spouse is saying, if it wasn't for that treatment, I would have lost my marriage, my spouse, God knows where we would be. You hear those stories over and over again. And then the saddest part of this is they've said to us, it's illegal to get these treatments in the United States, so I have to travel to Mexico, to Costa Rica to get treated. That's shameful. When a veteran tells you, this is what works for me, some of them are saying 80% success from one treatment, and I can't get it in the United States. What we're looking for is not to legalize it, but rather to study it, one step at a time. Again, what we want to do is have the VA look at it, study it to make sure that this is something the veterans will help the veterans. And number two, again, putting guardrails here. Because the studies I've heard, the medication, the treatments I've heard is, you don't take this stuff and just walk away. You've got to have a trained therapist that actually works with you to make sure that there are no negative complications from the treatment.
Right, Congressman?
Yeah, it's two things here. And number one, when Lou and I started the Good Path Caucus a year ago, PATH was psychedelic advancing therapies. I added GOOD, which stands for Get Off Opioid Dependency, okay? Because while the treatment may be a little different for everyone, the results that we've seen and heard from veterans that has literally changed their life. And oh, by the way, we've got ketamine, which is FDA approved. We've got MDMA moving towards FDA approval. So we are, again, trying to create that environment where the scientific community can do the research necessary to provide the therapies necessary and needed for our veterans. If it means taking a look at something different to help you get off the dependency of opioids,
Yeah.
that's the right path.
Congress, go
And
ahead.
think about this. The 1960s were probably the last time that we had major breakthroughs in treating mental health. We're looking at something very similar right now, something revolutionary, and we have to make sure we do the research and make sure that we understand what is going on out there and not having the laws from the 1960s, 1970s that are actually a barrier to moving in this direction.
You mentioned that the VA needs to study the issue, but there are a significant number of studies, and you already expressed frustration that veterans have to go overseas to get this treatment, which they say helps them. Why do we need another study?
Can I jump in on
Please,
that on the
yeah.
front
Go
end? The VA is always very cautious, as are other government bureaucracies and scientific communities. But it's what we're trying to do from our role as members of Congress is to get the VA to the point where they see it's okay to study this, that it is okay to do that, and they don't want to do the wrong thing for the wrong reason. We're kind of building their confidence through the funding we've requested and directing them to research this. I was up at the Bronx VA a year ago, Dr. Yehuda, who testified before our panel yesterday, and she's been doing research so far. Most of that research has been privately funded. Well, the bottom line is the private funding is going to go away at some point, so now we as the federal government need to take the look at our agencies and move them forward. And they're not starting down a path that hasn't already been done before. So we're trying to build the confidence and give them the direction they need.
I see.
If this treatment is half as promising as we think it will be, and actually, we want to make sure that the VA knows what they're treating and how to treat, because they will essentially be responsible primarily for treating our veterans.
I see.
And one of the other piece of that is that now the VA, again, in the testimony yesterday, you're going to have a new kind of therapist, a therapist that has different tools, and you're creating a series of jobs that are going to be using different kind of therapies to help the people in need. And if it works for veterans, it's probably going to work for the general public.
We just have a couple of minutes left, so I'll ask you a sort of a general question and ask you to sort of tee off. Congressman Correa, I'll start with you. What more can Congress, the Pentagon, the VA, and the White House do to improve the lives of those who have served their country?
Keep doing what we're doing. You know, over my political career, I've seen the issue of veterans up and down. We love veterans, we don't love veterans.
Yeah.
We have to always be reminded that veterans are the reason we have our freedom. Veterans have made this country great. Let's not forget that, and let's keep on that track.
In the simplest form, keep the veterans services as local as possible.
Yes.
And keep those providing them, whether it's a VSO, whether it's what other entity, keep those people trained to what's going on today that they should be aware of, whether it's claims application, whether it's introduction to care in the community and providing a pathway, but keep it local because the veterans live locally somewhere, whatever that locality is, keep it local.
All right. Congressman Bergen, Congressman Correa, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Great conversation. Appreciate it. Okay, hijack. Got it. Congressman Kiggins? Okay, great. Now I am pleased to introduce Congressman Jen Kiggins of Virginia. She's a veteran herself and co-chair of the Servicewomen and Women's Veterans Caucus. Please welcome Congressman Kiggins. Hi, pleasure to meet you. Mike Vaquera.
Nice
Hi.
to see you. Yeah,
Please have a seat.
Thank you.
Now, I have some stuff. I'm all jumbled up here, so I'm going to catch up. You flew helicopters in the Navy, is that right?
I did for 10 of the best years of my life. Yes.
And it's the Sea Knight, wasn't it?
I flew H-46s and H-3s, deployed
Yeah.
a couple times to the Persian Gulf, and met my husband, who's an F-18 pilot. We met in flight school early on, and he served for 20, and I did my 10, and then got out to raise our 4 children.
Wow.
So, yeah.
And how did you come to enlist in the Navy?
So I was an ROTC scholarship student in my undergraduate time at Boston University. So I grew up in Orlando, Florida, and my dad said, if you want to go to college, you got to find a way to pay for it. He was an Army veteran, so he was a Green Beret who served in Vietnam. So I grew up in a very patriotic house. We flew the flag, went to the Veterans Cemetery on Memorial Day, Veterans Day, things like that, and played that national anthem. I remember waking up to the Marine Corps marching band album like blaring through the house. So it was a
Wow.
very, very military focused home. But so when he said that, and I knew I wanted to go I loved Boston. The history in the city is a great place. And so to go that far away from home, I needed to find an avenue to pay for it. And the military just seemed like a great fit, a place to serve, and some great job opportunities. So applied for a ROTC scholarship and was a lucky recipient. And then after I graduated, had to join the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
And although there was such a delay to go to flight school at that time, I was able to take a year off and go to teach English in Japan, which was something.
I did that?
Did you? It was that was a great job too. But as an international relations major, that was just a great opportunity. And then I came back and started flight school, and it took about 3.5 years to get my wings and to show up at my fleet squadron, where I was
Wow.
able to then deploy a couple times. So I did that sea rotation, then came back to shore duty, and started to have children. We had gotten married, and so then got out after my second tour.
Where were you in Tokyo? In Japan?
I was in Matsuyama, so in Ehime, in
Matsuyama
Shikoku.
Prefecture?
Yeah,
Yeah.
down there. I loved it with the jet program. I don't know.
Oh,
But
that's
anyway.
cool.
Great job.
Well, let's not get too far into this, but I was in
Yeah.
Kyoto and I loved it.
Nice.
And I will indulge me for one more second because I'm
Yeah.
in the press and in the White House pool. When you travel with the president, you fly, like if he goes to New York, you fly into JFK.
Yeah.
They put the president gets in in Marine One. The press gets in another helicopter. They're Sea Knights. And they're really loud, aren't they? Oh
Nice.
my God.
Well, I hope that they're, we always say in the helicopter community, if it's not leaking, it's not working. So make sure there's at least something that's dripping somewhere so you know your hydraulic fluid's getting a good round. But yeah, it was a great job working with just some great Americans. And I love being mission focused. I think that drives me in Congress too. And in the military, as I'm sure many veterans will tell you, we didn't talk ever really about politics or about your gender, your race, or your religion. We just did the job, right? We showed up every day. We worked as a team, and I loved that concept. I loved being on that team and getting the mission done for the country.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, you're on the House Armed Services Committee, the Veterans Affairs Committee, so
Yep.
it's pretty
Yes.
good that you're here. You lead the Bipartisan Servicewomen and Women's Veterans Caucus. We already mentioned that. So you are at the center of congressional decision and policymaking when it comes to veterans. What are the biggest needs of veterans on your plate in Congress right now?
Yeah, so for me, so when I got out of the Navy, we missed that part of the story and raised my kids, and then I went back to school and studied to become a geriatric nurse practitioner. So have been working in healthcare for many years. So that gives me work in the VA Veteran Affairs Committee space. Just some opportunities to work on meaningful legislation. There's so much room for improvement with the way that we provide health care for our veteran population. I have so much in my second district of Virginia. It's Hampton Roads. So just a really large veteran population. The VA healthcare system is challenging. It has a lot of challenges, from electronic charting rollout to just making sure we have quality people working there, to how we're providing especially mental health care. That was something, as a primary care nurse practitioner, I did a lot of providing mental health care services, especially through the pandemic. So really understanding those challenges of getting that really important care to our veteran population. So I sit on the health subcommittee in the VA committee, and really just love to be a vocal advocate, because I understand, I think, have an inside perspective on how we can improve things.
You've said you're on a fact-finding mission to improve services for women veterans.
Yeah.
What are the unique challenges? What does that mean?
Yeah, so some VA hospital systems are doing a great job. In my district, we have the Hampton VA Hospital, which is actually close to my district, and they have a whole women's health center, which is great. They've got their own, mammography and providers that are very educated in women's health issues. So I would like to see that expanded. We met even yesterday with a group of actually active duty women from all service branches, listening to some of the challenges that they have on the active duty side, which are not too different, but just as a healthcare advocate in general, I think women have special mental health needs that we need to address. Part of the challenge with the mental health, providing that and making improvement when it comes to the VA or even active duty military, is that we can't do it alone. We're provider challenged, right? That being a voice for our providers has been something that we need more of, but we need civilian providers to be able to help us, because we can't do it all within house. But we need to make sure we're compensating those providers also. That was working with the TRICARE system, making sure that we're providing adequate and prompt compensation, because we need everybody on that team so that we have the availability of mental health care for people that need it.
So in the next 25 years, the number of women's veterans is expected to double, which is an amazing statistic.
Yeah.
So what needs to be done to prepare for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think just like we're focused on other avenues of care, we go through kind of phases. We're focused on things like diabetes or obesity or heart health or mental health. So I think that making sure that we have people that are focused on women's health care issues too. I would like to see those clinics expanded, and just making sure that they have the best technology that they're able to utilize for that primary preventative screening. That's something that I can continue to advocate and make sure we put our money where our mouth is and fund those things.
And you said you were a nurse practitioner.
Geriatrics.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
Love that. That's another, as a lot of our veteran population is aging, and so being able to take care of them in the way that they want to age, right? I think these are their golden years, and that was why I went into geriatrics, to be able to partner with them and their families Facility level care is one option, you know, when we talk about our frail elderly, but aging in place is my preferred option. How are we supporting caregivers? The VA system has a lot of benefits that are out there for caregivers, but my challenge as a primary care provider was educating my patients and their families on what exactly they could have. The VA could build you a ramp. The VA can provide adult diapers or nutrition supplements, but so many people don't know what those benefits are. So that's half of my battle constantly, is being able to educate our veterans
keep
that
them as
these
home
benefits are
as long as
here. What can we
possible.
do? So we've put in legislation to support caregivers, to support caregivers' mental health, be able to have things like health savings accounts, pay for in-home care. So we've been able to do things to kind of expand what in-home care looks like. I think when I was a state senator, which I was before Congress for 3 years, we did a lot with nursing home reform. I think there's a lot still to be done in that space, but I think that we also need to think of alternatives and other options because we can't home everyone in a facility. So, and there are some great options, having seen patient outcomes of patients that do stay home and have loved ones take care of them, but that's the real challenge for caregivers. So just being able to provide some insight from my perspective on how we can do better for older
You're a nurse
adults.
practitioner. I mean, particularly in rural areas, nurse practitioners or physician's assistants are the doctors in town, and they might be the only doctors for a 150-mile radius.
Yeah.
So how does that translate, particularly in rural areas? How does veterans care differ in rural areas than it does in urban areas?
Making sure that we're letting non-physician providers or advanced practice nurses in particular practice to the full scope of their certification. That's been something that's not a new issue in Congress, but just making sure that we are allowing those people, because we have a physician shortage, we don't have enough physicians, but we're able to place people like PAs and nurse practitioners into rural communities. So making sure that they can do what they need to do. Access to telehealth, I think, has been an important tool for us, making sure we're compensating providers for, we did a great job during COVID, and we had some telehealth just funding mechanisms in place, making sure we're codifying that, because telehealth is a great resource for places like rural areas where we have non-physician providers, but they sometimes need, they need those tools just at their fingertips so that they can provide the best patient care.
Okay, finally, you wrote an op-ed ahead of Veterans Day about the value of serving in the military and the need to motivate the younger generation to consider serving. I mean, we hear a lot about almost a crisis, I guess it might be safe to say, in recruitment numbers. I'll ask you the same question I asked Allison earlier. What's the answer?
Yeah, so recruitment, retention, quality of life is so important to me. I sit on that task force with Congressman Bacon that we've started this year, and we watch those recruitment and retention numbers. But my district, and I still, as a retiree, my husband's retired, we shop on base. I go on base frequently, and looking at just some of our infrastructure issues with the quality of housing that we're putting our military members in, especially on the unaccompanied side, so much room for improvement, not just where they work, where they live, where they play. We need to make sure that we are providing the best quality of care. I want young people to join the military. My son just graduated from the Naval Academy. He's now in flight school, waiting to start flight school in Pensacola. I have 2 other kids that are in Navy ROTC programs.
Wow.
But I want other, especially people who have served. We want it's a great job. We want our kids to serve. I want people who have not had experiences with the military to want to go into that line of work. It's an all volunteer force. We've got a great military, a great country that needs to be defended, but we've got a lot of competition out there for jobs right now. So making sure we're taking care of our military members is of the utmost importance to me, and I work on it every day.
Well, it's been great talking to you.
Thank you.
I know it's crazy up on the hill these days, so I
Just a
appreciate you
little.
taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I
let me say,
appreciate it.
Otsukaresamade.
Arigatou gozaimashita. Thank you.
All right.
Have a great rest of your day. Yeah,
Okay.
Take care. Thank you.
Sarah, do you have the intro for our next guest? Thank you.
You get to exit.
Pardon me?
We're done for you for right now.
Oh, I'm out of here.
We're
Oh,
slightly
well.
off schedule.
Fine and dandy.
So now it is time for our sponsor perspective of our program. We welcome Donato Clay, a U.S. Army veteran and Chief Operating Officer for the Veterans Benefit Guide, in conversation with Rena Shah, the CEO of Relax Strategies.
Hi all, is the thing on? Well, good morning to every one of you here. It is nice to see you all. We're having this conversation today because I think it's always important to grab some insights from our members who've served. And I want to first thank you, Donato, for your service to our country, and each one of you here in the audience who served. My first question for you is, you work for Veteran Benefits Guide. Can you tell us a little bit more about the company and your role? And that you're a disabled veteran, correct? So how that ties in, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Veteran Benefits Guide, or VBG, and I've been in role for about 4 months. And VBG was founded by a former Marine and former VA Raider who essentially realized that the system for helping veterans navigate through the VA was overly complex and bureaucratic and oftentimes led to inaccurate results. And so that led him to create and found this company to address those issues. And so for me, having gone through the system myself, both with VSO on 2 separate occasions, as well as on my own, well, actually there was a third step in the middle where I had reached out to an attorney and they basically told me they weren't going to be able to help me. And so I was going to have to do it on my own, essentially. So I went and did that, and it was complex. It was not easy. I utilized, my own doctor network. So I was a member of the National Guard for my military career, and I served as a JAG officer. So I was an attorney. The majority of my time was serving as a trial defense counsel, which is essentially like the public defender. But as I had to navigate this system on my own, I reached out to my own doctors. They said, what documentation do you need? I had to do my own research to find out what that was going to be, and then try to tell them what was going to be necessary. And so it was not an easy process, and all in all, it took a little over 4 years for me to get to the rating that I have today.
Okay. And when did you come to VBG?
In July of this year.
Okay. And about your disabled veteran status, can you tell us a little bit more about that, how that played in to essentially your work with VBG?
Yeah, so it was actually the main reason why I decided to work with VBG. So as I mentioned, when I was in the Army National Guard, I served mostly for the brunt of my career as a trial defense attorney. And so this desire to help my fellow veterans has always been there for me. And making the decision to work with VBG was a mission and purpose fit, right? So I think that's very important. There are a lot of veterans and just, I think, people of my generation who really believe in finding purpose in what they do. We'll leave jobs rather than work for an organization that we don't agree with or believe in. And that's essentially what made it a very easy decision for me to work with VBG. It was a continuation or an extension of the work I was doing with the military and in other civilian roles that I've had. I've worked in human health care, I've worked in veterinary care. And so, I think this idea of service after service is really important, and that's partly why I ended up joining VBG.
Okay. Well, you talked about going through the process yourself and what that was like. How does VBG get results for veterans?
Yeah, so we've had over 35,000 veterans that we've helped since 2015. And what sets VBG apart from, I think, many others in this industry is that we utilize an independent network of doctors to help the veterans actually get their disability questionnaires or their exams done. So our founder, who again was a former Raider, realized that the exams that the VA could provide, that the VA utilizes third parties to provide, is an overwhelmed system, right? So where doctors don't have enough time to actually sit with the veteran and understand exactly what's happening with their medical treatment or to perform an adequate and accurate evaluation. And so by utilizing an independent network of doctors, we are able to have that veteran spend the right amount of time and provide the right amount of documentation. So it's more thorough and more accurate, right? So there's a lot of veterans who end up with a long-term process through the system because of inaccuracies. And so our process helps with that. Ultimately, by allowing the veterans to avoid the C&P exams that the VA would then require.
And CNP again for our audiences.
Sorry, compensation and pension.
Okay,
So-
okay.
And so that exam process through the VA requires, again, it's a short examination. There are sometimes multiple examinations that need to happen, and they're not as accurate, right? So by utilizing independent private doctors who have the ability to spend more time with the veterans, that's what leads to, I think, an improved outcome. So it's allowing the veteran to present a more accurate and complete record, but it's also allowing them to avoid an entire process of the VA. So.
And there is, as many people have known over the years, a great backlog with the Veterans Administration. When you go to hospitals, whether you're talking about the administration writ large, there is a backlog. So how can VBG help the VA with that claims backlog? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, I think that's from what I described, right? Utilizing medical doctors who have licenses that they are held accountable for through state and local jurisdictions. They are providing more accurate medical records, right? And so that allows the ability to avoid, a bloated and bureaucratic system for the VA.
Well, I would just ask you to delve in a little deeper there when we talk about the doctors. Are these doctors in private practice, typically in their communities? So these are doctors that are part of your all's network, right?
So it's not our network,
Okay.
right? So we utilize an independent network of doctors.
Sure.
We have over 150 that we partner with
I
throughout
see.
the country.
Okay.
And so that's like, we don't own the doctors, right? We don't own the medical networks. And so it's them utilizing their medical judgment to do that evaluation for the veteran.
I see. Well, I must say, my first place volunteering in a hospital, and volunteered in many, was the Veterans Administration's hospital in my hometown of Beckley, West Virginia. And so I have great respect for everything happening in these hospitals. And I appreciate you talking about how VBG can help with that backlog of the claims. Now I have a little bit of an inside baseball question. What is NAVR, and how did VBG help spearhead its creation?
Right, so NAVR, or the National Association for Veteran Rights, is something that VBG is a significant supporter of, mostly because of transparency, accountability for bad actors within the space, and at the end of the day, providing veterans with a choice, right? So I mentioned that I was a trial defense lawyer in the Army, and that's akin to being a public defender, right? And a few times throughout my career, I would be representing a soldier, right? The motto of the Trial Defense Service in the Army is defending those who defend America. Sure. And oftentimes, right, this is a free service that is provided to them. And oftentimes, I would have a client who said, you know what, I'm going to pay for private counsel, right? They have a Sixth Amendment right to counsel, right? They don't have to pay for anything. Yet, they've decided to utilize a private party to assist them. And it's not that that person was a better attorney than I was, but I guarantee you they had far more resources available to them than we ever did. So I think that allowing veterans the choice, so if we can be transparent, if the industry can be transparent, if we can say the good and bad on both sides of what's happening here, and then let the veteran make the choice, right? They don't have to be forced to do anything. The same way that, if anyone in this room was involved in a criminal activity, that they wouldn't be forced to take a public defender, right? They would have the choice, and if they have the means and the ability to do so, and they decide that the party they want to engage with can do a better job, they should be allowed to do that.
I see. Well, when you put it like that and analogize it like that, it makes it a little bit more clear, I must say. And I'd just like to remind our audience to please be respectful. I must say, here in Washington, D.C., we often talk a lot about acts and what's in Congress and what's passing. So another inside baseball question for you. Why is the PLUS Act better than the GUARD Act?
Well, I think it's for some of what I just mentioned, right? So it's expanding choice for veterans. So if everyone in this room or everyone watching can admit that the VA is not a perfect system, the answer is not to eliminate choice and say we must maintain the status quo, right? Public, and I would love
please be
to
respectful.
engage afterwards if you'd like. So please reach out. But I would say that, providing veterans with an opportunity, actually having dialogue, right? So saying, let's actually discuss this. Let's not engage in ad hominems or diatribes. Let's debate the difficult things. There's something that I love about the veteran community is that we are very happy to engage in difficult conversations, right? And we don't. So thank you for not recognizing my service. And I would love to say that, you know, since the end of the Civil War, Black veteran voices have been silenced in this city, and I'm glad that we're still seeing that happen.
This is not a conversation. I'd like to remind
So-
the audience to please be respectful.
But I would say that ultimately, by having dialogue, by engaging in conversation, that's the best way for us to move forward, right? We have dialogue by actually taking opportunity to discuss, by taking invitation to discuss, by literally speaking in a public or private forum, as as VBG wants to encourage. So.
And that's the spirit of America, right? It's about choice. It's about keeping voices going and having the conversation. If we can delve into the PLUS Act a little bit more, is that something you could do for us again in comparison to the GUARD Act? What would you say are the key points that make it different?
So I would say, again, providing veterans with choice, allowing for veterans to have more transparency within industry on both sides is important, and providing accountability for bad actors, right? So it's very clear that there are not enough resources being provided to have accountability in the existing system. You know, the status quo is not providing enough accountability. So increasing that as well, I think, is the best way to provide support and options for our veterans.
I hear you. Well, is there anything we're leaving out about VBG that you can share with us today?
No, I would just say that, again, as stated, you know, we want to continue to have this dialogue. We want to continue to be an advocate for transparency and for accountability. So. So I would love to engage in conversation. Please reach out to me at any time afterwards. I'll be available and we can discuss.
Thank you, audience, for being respectful. Any closing thoughts you can share with the audience again?
I would just say, actually, to extend a thank you to those who came out, because anyone who is a vigorous advocate for veterans is something that we can support, right? We are vigorous advocates for veterans as well. And so I think that's why there are many ways to approach the situation and making sure that we are.
This is
Thank
not
you.
a conversation right now.
Again.
And we thank you for your rapt attention.
Thank you. Please.
And
Thank you. So I do encourage anyone to please reach out to me personally and directly, and then we can discuss further. So,
thank you again
Thank
for
you
your
so much.
service.
thank you.
Thank you, Donata and Rita, and thank you, Veterans Benefit Guide, for your support of today's program. Now, please welcome back Mike, who will be joined by two veterans who are very involved in this space to discuss the veteran's disability and the role of the private-public partnership. Welcome panelist Roger Doc Loesch, president of the USDA's Veterans Employee Organization, and Peter O'Rourke, president of the National Association for Veterans' Rights and managing partner of TCI Partners. Our sponsor, VBG, is a member of the National Association for Veterans' Rights.
I gathered.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I'd like to start off by asking you to tell us about your own experiences in navigating the VA benefit system.
Sure. Well, I was first time in the Navy, got out in '94. Second time was in the Air Force, got out in 2006. Didn't even do a disability claim until about a year ago. So, you know, fairly simple. I wanted to see how the process works since I'd already worked at the VA a couple times. Actually went fairly smoothly since it was one condition. So I was excited that actually I could get it done in a reasonable amount of time. I feel like my experience was pretty unique and not standard for most veterans.
I retired in 2012, and my initial process was a little painful, but got through it, worked with a great VSO there. But after my time and trying to get upgraded, a lot of times the VSOs weren't available for me. And I fought that for about 8 years, and then finally last year was upgraded after quite a long fight, honestly.
Can I back up for a second and tell me your years of service and your branch of service?
20 years Air Force, around the world 3 times, multiple deployments. But, for me coming back and I don't like the word benefit, I like compensation more so, because I believe that, we went and did and we should be compensated for the stuff that we were put through.
Sure.
4 years in the Navy, like I said, from 90 to 94, and then commissioned in the Air Force in 98, got out in 2006.
Okay, you were both worked with the sponsor, I gather is rather controversial. The Veterans Benefit Guide helped you get an increase in your disability rating. What did they do that was different? Why did you go to them?
For me, it was cost beneficial and the process worked. After the process for me and my experience not working for so many years, finally I got to see the light at the end of the tunnel.
How many years did it not work for you?
8 years.
Yeah.
And within 6 months, I was able to get a disability rating upgrade.
Peter?
I didn't use anybody.
You didn't?
No, I did, like I said, a single issue claim with the advancements that the VA's made online is pretty seamless, with one condition. And I think that's what everybody needs to remember. That's very unique in this space. For folks like Doc and others that need help, the system doesn't work well for them. And then the advocates that are out there to help them with a complex case sometimes don't spend all the time with it. And having seen that from both the VA's perspective and getting phone calls from folks trying to get help, it's frustrating. So when you look out trying to improve those systems and trying to help folks get better, transparency, accountability for those actions makes perfect sense, which is why we started the association.
Critics, including some in this room, I would imagine, call it claim sharks, that it's predatory, that they're taking advantage of veterans in need in their desperation.
I don't see that. For me, more than anything, they were going to walk me through the process, and here are your choices. And I think more than anything, that's what it is. It's a choice. And I'm not going off post to get a payday loan, because I know that's predatory. But VBG and other good actors, because I know there are also bad actors, and I am a lifetime member of the VFW, American Legion, and I know the workloads of the VSOs in my group. And I tell you what, if I were to bring in my stack of medical records, I know I'm not going to get the detailed look-through that I would need, because not only do they have my medical records, but they have 30 other people that just retired or are just getting out as well. So you don't get that attention to detail when you have a volunteer and a free service.
I'm not a volunteer. Does USDA know that you're here using the moniker on Twitter? Because you don't represent this employee of USDA. I know, we won't believe it.
Love to have a conversation afterwards. And I see, and one of the things about this too, and there are multiple attacks because of what we have done, but it was cost beneficial to us. But nobody is willing to have a conversation with us afterwards. They just want to yell, they just want to scream at us.
You want to have a conversation?
I'll
have a conversation with you right now.
We'll go to Shelley's afterwards and have a cigar.
Well, that's not going to be in front of the public, right? You're just.
So let's talk about the public, and let's talk about the 15,000 accredited agents the VA's had to remove over the last few years.
Okay.
Who's holding that accountable? VA Office of General Counsel.
Listen,
Why
the
we're
gentleman
setting
asked
up
the
is-
question, let the gentleman answer. If we're going to have a discussion, let's do it that way, okay?
There's an issue across the board here. Everybody needs to pitch in to solve it.
Yes.
The fact that we're just now standing up and being very vocal about this issue today, when a group stands up to say, we want to hold this part of this industry accountable, that's unfair.
You're right,
But hold on a second.
accreditation, right? You should lower our standards so that more people.
The standards of accreditation for the National Association of Veterans veterans' rights matches what your standard accreditation is for accredited agents. In fact, we take that bar even higher because it is an industry thing. We can do that. I would encourage the VA and those to look at those standards as well to increase that. But right now, we're just trying to keep up because we can't even keep up with keeping accredited agents accountable. So let's look at this thing from across the board instead of just throwing rocks at a group that's saying, yes, there's bad actors out there that do, I know the gentleman left already, that do charge for things they shouldn't be charging for. That's not something that we tolerate. It's not something that good actors want to tolerate either. So we stand up and we make a difference. Now, we should all be doing this together instead of, we're just going to jump up and start saying, no, claims, start throwing memes at people. That doesn't make any sense. We're here for veterans. Everybody in this room, whether they agree with us or not, are here for veterans. Now, we can come to some common ground with that. Or we can keep shaking our heads and say, no, we're going to continue with this same system that basically keeps letting veterans down. Everybody has a lot of work to do, and we can keep that going together.
I guess the question would be, why not work within the current system to simplify things, to streamline things?
So there's two ways to work within the current system. You can work with the VSO, or you can work, well, I'm not going to include the attorneys because that's the appeals process, which is basically an admission of error. If you have to do an appeal, that means your initial claim didn't do correctly. True, right? I don't think anybody's going to disagree with that. So with veteran service organizations have their own accreditation process within their own groups. Fair, maybe it could be improved, I guess. With the outside industry, which, yes, we were going to talk about whether there are penalties or not. I mean, if it's fraud, prove it in fraud. That doesn't stop anybody from proving a fraud case today. The reason that's not being proved today is because the companies, and especially the members of NAVR, aren't committing fraud. Otherwise, you'd be going after that. So that's where we're at. We can fix this or not, but we can just draw our lines and go from there.
Anything, Doc?
No, he's on point.
All right. I'm going to go back to the scripted questions then. Doc, what is your advice then for veterans navigating the system now?
Be educated. Go out and look. Try to take any path that you can, but find what works for you. Vets don't know what vets don't know. And if we're not here educating one another on everything that's out there, not just this or that, but what are all your options? There are a lot of lost souls out there that aren't getting the compensation that they should be because they don't know how to do it. And I'll be the first to say, go to a VSO. But if that does not work for you, you do have a choice. And that leaves it up to them. I'm not pushing an agenda or saying anything, but I'm going to put that out there that here are all your options. And I think that's the fairest way to do it. And then let that veteran make their own choice and have their voices heard.
Peter, yesterday officials from some of the veteran service organizations, I believe it was yesterday, had a press conference attacking the claim sharks, we've already talked about that offer, quote, high-priced assistance and suspect medical advice without following the well-established professional and ethical standards of VA accreditation. What's your response to that?
No response to what was done yesterday. The response is a group has been stood up to hold bad actors accountable and promote an option for veterans. That's the story. So we want to argue about other aspects. You want to throw stones at specific companies. That's not really a useful discussion because that ultimately doesn't help veterans.
To both of you then, the VA, and I think I quoted earlier a statistic that benefits were up 39% in the last year. Mm-hmm. Positive trends, record disability claims paid out. So are you encouraged by that? Is that an indication that things are working better at the VA?
I think so, but I think the issue that's going to be if everybody that could receive benefits all stood up at once, the system would collapse just because of the sheer volume. So I think that's, there's a need for that.
So
The PLUS Act allows for loopholes that are going to take advantage of the lost souls that you just mentioned. And if the for-profit
many cases of people taking advantage of PACT Act do you know of? Who's taking advantage of the PACT Act right now? Who's taking advantage of the PACT Act right now?
Hold on, hold on. Peter,
you interrupted.
Peter,
but-
just ask a question. Sir, let him ask his question.
No.
Private agents who are not.
No, not ambiguous, not anonymous. Sorry, not anonymous.
Do you have a question, sir? Do you have a question?
Not a statement. I asked one simple question. We'll let you engage. You said PACT Act.
I never said PACT.
He said plus Act.
Plus Act.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Read the act, you'll see, and I'm sure.
Do you have a question, or you
What's
just
your
have
question?
a statement? Do you have a question?
My question is, the whole thing is questionable.
No, not a
That's
statement.
not a
What's the question?
Here's a question for you. Why not abide by the GUARD Act?
The GUARD Act isn't law, so let's look at either
Why not
existing
abide
statute
by the existing
or the Plus Act.
statute,
Okay,
so
finish.
So that way, the attorneys and private agents for profit are tied to a free structure instead of having all these.
Where are attorneys' fee structures tied to, sir? Where are they tied to? What do attorneys do right now? Appeals, failures, that's what they're tied to.
Yeah, and charging for initial claims.
Thank you.
No, so, come on.
Tell me that doesn't happen. It happens every day.
They do
Initial
charge for
claims,
they
I
do
get
charge
4
for
months,
appeals.
I get 4
Absolutely.
months.
If I'm a veteran and I go
So
get
you
my
can
claims
make
done,
veterans, that's what you're doing.
finish and then I'll get done. If a veteran goes and gets their initial claim done, whatever way it's done, and it's failure because they have to go do an appeal, then who gets paid? Who gets paid? It's the accredited attorneys who have to help them get their appeals done. Nothing against the accredited attorneys that get their appeals done. They're needed because there's a failure in the system. Get the claims done right the first time, and we don't have that issue. Now, what is... What?
What about initial claims?
That is the initial claims.
Not the appeal. I'm talking about an initial claim.
That's the whole point, sir. Initial claims done correctly eliminate the need for appeal, correct?
No. Not necessarily.
In what case? In what case? What are you appealing then?
Well, you could appeal a wrong decision.
No, you can get your...
Are you still charging them for an initial claim?
That's not the point what we're talking
No, that
about.
is the point.
No, we were talking about appeals. You're trying to shift it back and get it back to where you want to say it's fraud or whatever else. That's not the issue. We were talking about appeals, failures of the initial claims and supplemental system.
Okay, all right.
Well, then if you agree, then we'll end it
I
there.
have one more question back here, sir. Do you have a respectful, polite, and informative question?
Yes, sir. Bob Perry. I run the National Defense Committee. We work on veteran legal and civil rights. Unfortunately, Peter O'Rourke has had to deal with me in the past, so please don't take that into consideration. Look, I'm a disabled vet. I just recently got my disability claim back. I used one of the consulting services. I paid them $1,000. I knew exactly what I was doing. They were Johnny on the spot. They were there every step of the way with me. They were calling me out, hey, you should be having your C&P exam soon. Can you please set up a meeting with us so we can go over your C&P exam with you? Oh, how did your C&P exam go? Let's discuss what we're going to do afterwards. Hey, you got your decision back. Yeah, these things are wrong. We should ask for a higher level review. Johnny on the spot. I also gave my power of attorney to a major veteran service.
Sir, could you ask a question, if you don't mind?
Well, I also gave my power of
At least one guy
attorney to a
sings it.
veteran organization, and they never contacted me. So the question is, how are we, given the previous speaker and the Sixth Amendment protections, how can the current system provide adequate representation to disabled veterans without being able to go to an attorney or go to a consulting service and not deny them representation in what is essentially an adversarial process?
Sir, do you have a professional stake in any of this? I just like to know.
Well, yes, I run an organization called the National Defense Committee. We're a 501c4. We've been around since 2003. We work on military, veteran, legal, and civil rights.
Okay, thank you.
I'm also the co-chair of the National Military Veterans Alliance. It's an organization of 45, it's a coalition of 45 military and veteran organizations.
All right.
People in this town know me. I've been involved in this since 2007. I used to run the Federal Voting Assistance Program in the
Okay.
Department of Defense. So,
All right, you're legit.
not know me, but
I'm sorry, I don't, and that's my shortcoming. And-
Well, my big thing, and kind of piggybacking on that, I'm not an attorney. I am a broken weapons loader. I don't know how to navigate the system. So I needed help. And I had a choice to get help. So I'm glad these things exist. And I hope they continue to exist. But then again, I hope that these bad actors that we hear so much about and people are screaming about there needs to be an accreditation. I mean, and we saw that also with, the, people using their GI Bill to go to unaccredited colleges. And they kind of nipped that in the bud. So let's just continue to do that process with this as well and not scream about it, not fight about it, because the screaming and fighting is helping no one. It's just noise when we should be together helping veterans help veterans, period.
All right, well, on that note, I think it's appropriate that we're in the National Press Club in the First Amendment Lounge. It's been a lively discussion.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, sure.
I'll throw this out here because I think at the end here we've had a positive conversation. I'll say for NAVA that we should have an open conversation where we can discuss these things and work on these solutions. Anyone that's willing to do that, I'll hold the forum. And we can get and duke it out. We can talk through this stuff. We can yell and scream, whatever else, until we get to some understanding, even if it's not agreement. There needs to be more conversation, because frankly, when you go back and look at testimony from the VA or from other service providers or from veteran service organizations, we're all over. And we do have a declining population of veterans. We have an increasing population of women veterans. We've got all kinds of issues out there. If we can't come together, even if we have different approaches, and at least agree that we have to focus on helping veterans, giving them choices, giving them options, then frankly, we all get out of this business, hand it over to somebody else. So we'll set up that time to do that. Anybody can reach me at peter.o'rourke@navra.org. We'll have this conversation. We don't have to have it in the press club, but we can have it. And then we can actually communicate, whether it's to Congressman Correa, Bergman, the rest of them, and say, here's what we're thinking. Because right now, we're just throwing stuff at everybody. Veterans are just tuning us out. We know that. Especially the people in this room know that veterans are just tuning us out. And they're moving on with their lives without any concern for the groups that are up here, supposedly advocating for them and doing their best. Let's figure out how to tie back into them, and then maybe we can actually do something positive.
All right, well, thank you, gentlemen, very much. There is one more panel, a very important panel on mental health coming up.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to our guests and our moderator and to the audience. This is obviously a difficult and complicated conversation, and we do appreciate you being here, and we do appreciate you participating. All right, we're going to take a deep breath, and we're going to change directions, and we are now going to introduce to the stage Steve Scully, contributing editor of The Hill, who will be doing our final segment on veterans' mental health, invisible wounds. We will be joined today by Brett Waters, co-founder and executive director for Reasons for Hope, and Lawrence Korb, senior fellow on the Center for American Progress. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, and it's good to be with all of you. My dad is an Army veteran. I had a brother who served in Vietnam, and my 2 daughters are Navy pilots, so for me this is personal. Larry, good to see you again. Welcome to the National Press Club.
Nice to be here.
Brett, I want to begin with you, and I want to begin on a very personal note, because for you the issue of mental health is far too personal. So if you could begin by sharing the story of your grandfather and your own mother. And thank you for being with us.
Sure. So Reason for Hope, the nonprofit that I co-founded, is named in memory of my mother, Sherry Hope Waters, who I lost to suicide 5 years ago. I lost her father, my grandfather, who was a World War II veteran. He was a fighter pilot, shot down at the age of 16 years old. Lost him to suicide when I was young, and I never knew that's how he died. My family never spoke about it. It was just sort of hidden and kind of out of shame and guilt and the way that far too many families react in that situation. And after I lost my mom, decided I needed to take a very different path, and became very open about our story and involved in mental health and suicide prevention advocacy work. And with Reason for Hope, we focus on advancing psychedelic medicine-assisted therapies, which we consider to be the next wave of innovation in mental health care.
You are to be commended for turning a horrible tragedy into hope for others. Larry, why is it, whether World War II or Vietnam or more recently Iraq and Afghanistan, dealing with mental health is often such a stigma?
Well, I think if you go back to, I remember when I left Vietnam and came home, you couldn't say mental health. You were weak if you did it. I mean, it's not like now. I mean, if you take a look now, you say, you know, almost half the people coming back from war, you know, basically, you know, have mental health problems and get treated. But that was not, people just didn't think about that. The other thing that I think is important here is the declining number of people who served in the military, okay, from generation to generation. And right now, I think that basically we're paying attention to it. The VA is getting more money. Their budget's over $300 billion. They're hiring tens of thousands of people. So we'll be able to deal with it. But I do think it's always important to keep in mind that for many quote unquote combat veterans, that's a sign of weakness if you claim you have mental health problems. But I think we're moving in the right direction. As I say, when we came back from Vietnam, nobody said it, you know.
You couldn't talk about it.
What? No.
You could not talk about it.
Yeah, and I think the other reason that's important is if you've served, for example, in Iraq and went through hell there, and then you found out Saddam had no weapons of mass destruction, you know, what you're saying, why did I do this? You know, and suffer this. And the good news is more people are surviving their combat injuries, but then you look and you say, you know, I did this, or, you know, in Afghanistan, when we withdrew from that and it's back to where it was before we started, you're thinking, you know, I made this sacrifice, and so it does create, I think, more mental problems, you know, than we had in the past. We need to be sensitive to that because you're not going to have any World War II, you know, type of things. I remember when I went to Vietnam, I was excited. I thought, oh my God, this is just like my family, and basically fighting the communist menace and the domino theory and all that. And one night we got lost and came upon a Catholic monastery, and I had studied French in school, everybody did. And so I went in, and we went in, and we talked, and the monks were great. They gave us food, and they fed us. And we got back in the Jeep, and the commander said to me, you guys talked about a few other things. What did you say? And I said, the priest said, why do you think you're going to make out any better here than the French? And I thought, holy smoke, that's how we see us. They don't see us as fighting this communist menace. It's, you know, other colonialists. And so you do that, and then you said, I spent 4 years of my life doing that. And, you know, what did I get for it? I mean, so I think this is what's, you know, happening now. Back then, we didn't talk about it. But, you know, now I'm glad we are. I'm glad we're treating it. And we need to recognize this is a fact of life, because any of the wars, you take a look at the wars going on now, if we had Americans there, who's up, who's down, who's right, who's wrong.
And Brett, part of that treatment, as you all know, is dealing with substance abuse, drugs, and alcohol. And by every statistic, the veterans are not getting the support they need when it comes to these issues. Why?
So I think that part of the problem, and you mentioned the statistics here, we talked a little bit before coming out here about the suicide number often quoted at 17. But the reality is when you factor in the overdose rate, it's about 44 veterans a day, which is just a tragic...
Every day?
Every day. It's a tragic, tragic number. And unfortunately, we don't have particularly effective treatments for, you know, mental health conditions ranging from PTSD, depression. You know, we often talk a lot about, you know, some of the concepts brought up here, moral injury and survivor's guilt. Are, you know, there's no effective treatments for these types of things, and we don't have particularly effective treatments for opioid use or other substance use disorder treatments either. So we're actually spending more and more money at the VA and elsewhere, but the problems are getting worse. So that's really why our focus is shifting the paradigm of mental health care away from the kind of SSRI era and moving into these psychedelic therapies that are rapid acting and can work much more robustly. And when they're done in a clinical setting, paired with therapy, and you can really go deep and address those traumas and underlying issues, there is a lot of potential to help people resolve issues that SSRIs and kind of chronic use of SSRIs just cannot address. So this really is a new era of mental health care, in our opinion, and substance use disorder treatment as well. There's one psychedelic drug. It's not a classic psychedelic, but it's called Ibogaine, and we've been involved in Kentucky, working with the Opioid Abatement Advisory Commission, is looking at allocating $42 million towards the research and development of Ibogaine that shows unique capabilities to help people get through that withdrawal period. And we have a crisis that is just killing so many people. We need to be exploring every possible option, and we applaud the leadership in Kentucky for taking a hard look at this, because there are some Ibogaine is a little bit riskier than some of the other psychedelics from a cardiac perspective. It has to be done in clinic, EKG screenings, careful medical monitoring. But when you do the risk-benefit analysis of how many people are dying, it is a tool that we really need public funding to help advance that research and be able to make this an option, even if just for compassionate use. But I think it has significant potential to help bring down that overdose rate, and also shows amazing potential for traumatic brain injury as well. So it's another issue.
But does Congress see that? I know you testified yesterday about this before the House Oversight Committee, the subcommittee. Do they hear you?
So yesterday's hearing was particularly focused on suicide prevention, and there was a much stronger focus on the breakthrough therapies, which right now we have MDMA-assisted therapy is a FDA breakthrough therapy for PTSD. There are 2 different psilocybin therapies that have that breakthrough therapy designation from the FDA for treatment-resistant depression and major depressive disorder. So the FDA recognizes the value here. That is a designation meant to speed up the timeline of approval. Unfortunately, because they are Schedule I drugs, they are subject to the highest barriers to research, get very little research funding, and they're blocked for compassionate use. So that is a core problem that we were highlighting at yesterday's hearing. We just had a series of 3 hearings in Kentucky specifically focused on Ibogaine for opioid use disorder, and that is a hearing that has not taken place in Congress yet, and it absolutely needs to. It is critical information that we need our federal legislators to understand, because there are differences between these. They're often lumped together as psychedelics, but there are important differences in their capabilities, their risks, their benefits, and I think it's a really important hearing that needs to take place in Congress next year.
So Dr. Korb, as you look at the time that you served in the Reagan administration now 40 years ago and where we are today, what's the trajectory been? What kind of progress have we made? And what are the challenges that need to be met moving forward?
Well, I think the progress we've made is, and this seminar here, I think, is a tribute to it, we are focusing on mental health. Back then, even in the 80s, that wasn't seem to be a big, a big thing. We were worried about saving the all-volunteer military and trying to get that going, and you keep retention up. And so we were not aware, and we didn't focus very much on that at all. I mean, I could get a big pay raise. I mean, my first meeting with President Reagan, I said, we need a 14.3% raise for the military. He said, where did you get that from? I said, the Army Times said that's what we need, and all of the soldiers are reading that, and we were having retention problems and everything like that. So we really didn't focus on it. I think what happened is it was really after 9/11 that this took. Now, it should have been before, but we weren't, focusing on it. And then, of course, with those 2 wars and the people coming back, and the good news is there were more people survived battles, but then they, also had more people with, mental health problems. I'm sure if we were more sensitive, we would have realized that even back then, but we just did not.
But as you know, and I see this firsthand with my daughters as naval intelligence officers and pilots, the way we fight wars are changing, continues to change. Is the VA changing with the times? Is the VA changing with the
I
times?
think so. I mean, I think under McDonough, under the Trump administration, I think you had 3 or 4 directors, and the turnover, and you had people, and now they're giving McDonough what he needs. I mean, if you look at the number of employees that he's added, and as I said, their budget is over $300 billion. So I do think they are, very, very sensitive to it, and so we're moving in the right direction. Are we where we need to be? No, but I think we need to recognize some of the points that have been made, here today, that in fact more people are surviving. War is different than it, used to be. And so therefore, you're going to have more of these problems. And you've got I think another thing is you've got things like the Wounded Warrior Project. You've got people outside that are, trying to help here. And the government ought to subsidize. I don't know what their budget is, but, the government ought to be willing to provide them with grants and stuff like that to continue their work.
You testified also yesterday about your own personal experiences with psychedelics. Can you share that with this audience here? Because I think that is instructive in how you are approaching the work that you're doing today.
Sure. So kind of how I came into this work before I had lost my mom several years before when I was in college. I had done psilocybin mushrooms recreationally with friends, and I have long struggled with an eating disorder that's not commonly spoken about. There's no approved treatments for it. It's called avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. It's like a phobia of foods. And I grew up wrestling, so I hid it behind cutting weight, preferred people thinking I was anorexic, that just had this weird aversion to eating kind of normal adult foods. I had this experience with psilocybin mushrooms, and it basically just reduced my anxiety about normal, eating normal foods by about 80 or 90%. For about a 6-month window. And so now all of the kind of what I would describe as like the normal adult foods I eat now were picked up in that time frame. And I sort of just chalked it up to a miracle at the time. My parents knew about it, but I never spoke about it publicly or really with anybody else. And then by the time I lost my mom and got involved in mental health and suicide prevention work generally and came across the research in psychedelics, that was a very triggering thing for me to sort of see that research and go, wow, this is very much aligned with what I experienced. How did I not know about this sooner? We have so much work to do to educate the public, to educate legislators and policymakers, and change some of the laws and policies to help advance the research and get this out to the public. And right now we have our coalition, it's called the Veteran Mental Health Leadership Coalition, has about 45 partner organizations and a number of veterans who have been traveling outside the country to access these treatments abroad and have just absolutely remarkable, life-changing experiences. And it is tragic that they are forced to go outside the country to access these therapies, especially when we have 2, as I mentioned, that are FDA breakthrough therapies, but because of the legal barriers, can't be accessed under right to try in the United States. And yeah, veterans are going abroad to access them, and it's a situation that should not happen, and we can certainly do better.
So let me get to what I think is the core issue here, and you both have addressed this, but want to get your thoughts about whether it's 1 or 17 or 44 suicides a day, it's too many. What isn't being done that needs to be done? Larry, let's start with you.
Well, I think what isn't being done is that people trying to get it don't get it right away, or they don't get it in a timely manner.
And why is that?
Well, it's just a question of money and people that you have to be able to do it. You also have, at least some people I know, they've gone kind of this is a sign of weakness, or you're making this up. See, if you're wounded, you can't dispute. But if I go in and say, oh, I'm having nightmares, I need this or I need that, it's hard to, know if in fact you're right. So I think that's another problem that you have. Now we're getting better with it. And as I say, you got things like, the Wounded Warrior Project that can help, help people. And society is coalescing around it. It used to be, you know, people didn't like the war in Vietnam, you know, so they weren't helping that thing. But now, you know, people know that the wars we fought were fought at least ostensibly for good reasons, and basically that the people who will do volunteers, they don't have to do it. So we really owe them more than we did, you know, us, draftees. So I think that's happened. And, you know, it's interesting when Biden spoke this week at Arlington, he mentioned his son had served in the military. And I think that kind of helps people to realize, you know, that, now we don't know if he died because of that, but, you know, he did die shortly, you know, after he came back. So people realize these wars can have these effects and we need to deal with them. As I say, under Trump, they kept changing VA directors and, you know, it just wasn't, the government didn't have its act together. Now they got their act together. They got a long way to catch up, you know. They got to hire several 100,000 more people. And if we keep doing that, then I think we'll, you know, begin to get this problem under control. And here's another thing we haven't mentioned. In addition to all of the other things, you got sexual assault problems in the military. And that is causing more and more people to have, you know, these mental problems.
And I want to underscore the point that it is an all-volunteer force, and so saluting the men and women who are putting on the uniform and serving unselfishly, because there are so many work choices out there. You don't get paid a lot in the military, but a sense of pride. What isn't being done, Brett, that needs to be done?
So I think that we are doing a better job of awareness, education, trying to destigmatize and get people, you know, willing to seek out help. But I think kind of going back to my core point here is that what we're doing once people are willing to go forward and go to the VA for treatment or elsewhere, the treatments we have just aren't very effective, and so we're spending more and more money. There's a lot of people working really hard who are, you know, doing their best trying to help, but people aren't really getting better often. And that's, you know, I think something that we have this unique moment in time right now where we really need to be putting a lot of money into research and to training providers in this specialized form of care with MDMA and psilocybin and these psychedelic therapies that are very powerful. You need people who are well trained to provide these and to offer the therapy, you know, both preparation during these treatment administration sessions and in what we call like integration therapy to help people process these really powerful experiences and hopefully, you know, then transition to more community care and community settings for peer support. And that's hopefully a model that we're going to see much more robust and durable outcomes that will get people actually out of the system so they're not just chronically you know, taking medication and you know, patients for the rest of their lives.
But I'm curious, this is 2023. We have gone through Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. There are so many facilities, so much research going on. Why is there still this disconnect in terms of treatment?
So I think that that's a great question, and I think unfortunately we've seen a declining amount of innovation in the private sector because the fact that you know, these treatments are, people can just kind of stay on them for, you know, forever, and there hasn't really been, until this rise of psychedelic therapies, there hasn't been a whole lot of innovation in mental health in a long time, and I think people just you know, assumed that like the problem would get better as awareness and access increased, and that does not seem to be the case. And so I think we really need to transition into kind of what we call this new paradigm of mental health care.
I want to come back to that as my final question, but Larry, why the disconnect? Why? I mean, you're an expert in this area. You served in the military. You served in government. We have a lot of the resources. We have the research. We have the wherewithal, and yet still today we're saying we're not getting enough.
Well, I think it's, you don't know how to deal with it to the extent that you should. We've mentioned here several things, but I think if we were to come up after this and said, buy this drug or do that, you'll cure it. But you don't know. I mean, you have all of these competing things, and when I was getting ready for this, I was looking up all of the different treatments and stuff like that. I think that's the problem. We don't, I think the resources are getting there. As I said, the VA budget's now over $300 billion. They hired tens of thousands, more people.
But it's more than just the money.
What?
Right? It's more than just, the money's
That's
important,
right,
but it's more
yeah,
than just the
but
money.
we don't know exactly what. You come in and say, I'm having nightmares. Well, what do we give you? How do we deal with it? And it becomes a real, issue, just like mental health in society is too. So I think that's part of the problem. And, we're doing the research. Hopefully we'll get the right answers.
So my takeaway is that we've come a long way. We're doing better. We have some steep challenges ahead. Brett, thank you for sharing your story, because I think it's important for people to understand that this is personal, and you are no different than so many other individuals who have dealt with pain and suffering. So my final question for you, for organizations, for the government, for all the people here, what are their marching orders? What's the path moving forward? What are your recommendations? Brett, I'll begin with you and then give you the last word.
Sure. So we are supporting a bill right now called the Breakthrough Therapies Act, and reaching out to members of Congress in support and trying to help push this through, I think would be critical, so veterans are no longer forced to go outside the country for compassionate use of these treatments. And we really need the government to be funding the research so we can have a better understanding of how these treatments work, for who they work, how best to deliver them, because it's really not just about the drug, it's about the therapy and the support that goes with it, because these are powerful substances that can help you access these really traumatic memories and experiences and get to the underlying cause, hopefully, of what is causing these nightmares and other issues. And that is, something we're going to really need a lot of research support, and we need to make it easier to do that research. So please contact your members of Congress to support Breakthrough Therapies Act. It's HR 1393 and S.689. And we need to be doing all that we can to make sure that veterans have the tools that they need to heal.
And how is Brett Waters doing personally?
This is heavy, heavy work. It's not easy to speak to policymakers, other advocacy groups, and educating veteran service organizations, and kind of having to talk about my suicide loss all day, every day. It's heavy, so it can be challenging. It's not fun. It's not fun work, but it's important, and it's extremely meaningful, and especially the veteran coalition that we've created, the Veteran Mental Health Leadership Coalition, is just their selfless service now kind of extending to helping people get access, whether outside the country or inside the country, has just been so inspiring, and that's the other thing that really motivates me to keep going, even though it's often, really, it is difficult to talk about this all the time. So it's heavy but meaningful.
We all commend you for that. I think that deserves a round of applause.
Great job.
You get the final word.
Oh, I thought we were over. I would say two things. One, contribute to the Wounded Warriors, groups like that. I think that's important. These groups are very good. And the other is to ensure that this stays on the front burner in the next administration, whether it goes back to Trump or Nikki Haley or whoever, or to Biden, that you've got to keep giving this priority, and the Congress has to keep funding what the VA wants, and not cut it. I don't know what's going to happen with this budget deal they got. Are they going with last year's VA spending instead of this year?
It's called Groundhog Day. Yeah. We want to go through it every 6 weeks. It's called job security for congressional reporters. Oh, yet another budget deadline in January, and then in February, and then anyhow.
Yeah, and that's not going to help because the VA can't increase their...
Exactly.
And hire the people.
We'll get the final word. Thank you. Please stay seated for a moment. Brett, Larry, thank you very much for joining us today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, That brings us to the end of our program. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you for your support of veterans and your passion on all of these issues. The Hill will continue to provide a forum for discussion. And again, we thank you for joining us today.